Well, thanks for joining us here, friends. Obviously, one of the greatest issues we're facing in Pennsylvania is record crime. And, different stats, different places. I'm using the most reliable I could find. And so, but do know, whether we agree on the specific numbers or not, we have a problem in Pennsylvania. And it's especially poignant in the Southeast. Among most of the state, Rebbe and Carrie and I are hearing about the economy and cost of living and making ends meet, inflation, choosing between heating and eating. But in the Southeast especially, we're hearing a lot about crime. And it's really heartbreaking. As I mentioned during my remarks, of course, the Attorney General has presided as a senior law enforcement official for 6 years over law and order in the state. And he's failed us abysmally. He's completely dropped the ball. When you have record homicides in Philly last year, I believe it was 562, 439-ish or so now. It's hard to keep track in Philly this year. I think it's going to sadly, tragically, be up around 600. Fentanyl deaths across the state are just tragic and heartbreaking. And Rebbe and I have known many stories, many families affected by that. In my own district in Chambersburg, 18-year-old beautiful young man, Tyler, bought something off the street, did not think it was fentanyl lace, and he died. And his mom was heartbroken that in Pennsylvania, the dealer was on the street just a few months later. And that's why I introduced Tyler's Law. That would be a minimum 25 years. And those dealing with drugs, selling drugs, not those sharing. There's just a big distinction there. That's a different topic. Also looking at introducing legislation that would offer the death penalty as well for those that deal in drugs that kill people. I'm cognizant that politics, as Benjamin Franklin said, is the art of the possible. So hopefully somewhere, one of those two bills or somewhere in between will come to an agreement in the General Assembly. On day one, we have to support our police. I will remind people on the 4th of June, 2020, Tom Wolf, in defiance of his own edicts for the state of Pennsylvania, marched in the BLM rally with more than 25 people. There was thousands there. And to stand with people that stand against the police sends us a message across the state that the police we don't have their backs. So on day one, it's more than symbolic that the police will know that Mastriano is a law and order governor and that we stand with our men and women in blue or gray, and grays being state police. I look forward to establishing a scholarship program to support the training and hiring of more police officers. The General Assembly, we did authorize an increase of 200 state police. That was actually one of my Senate bills that we integrated into the budget this past July. And so we're already making a difference before even being in office, Carrie.
That's right.
We're going to invest in innovative technology and equipment to protect and support our officers. We will protect Act 111. I've told my caucus months ago, I think it was back in June, because I know within Republican ranks there's some debate about that, but Act 111 defends police collective bargaining, and it's become the last line of defense between them and social justice warriors, going after them for split-second decisions they make in the field. We will reject the defund the police movement and provide resources to support the mental health of our police officers as well. Yep. And a lot of times they find themselves like in a combat-like environment like we face in the military, and we have to take care of our own. We have to keep violent criminals behind bars. Under this current administration, which Josh Shapiro is a part of, and he's part of the problem, criminals have to be held accountable and do their time when they do the crime. And that's part of the big problems in Philadelphia. No accountability and early release. So we'll work with the General Assembly to strengthen penalties for repeat offenders and especially for violent criminals. We'll support funding for additional prosecutors in high crime areas. I will note some years ago Josh Shapiro was given that authority by the General Assembly and he has yet to use it. He just keeps dropping the ball. We'll expand programs that protect witnesses from retaliation and intimidation. That's a huge problem in the Southeast especially. We'll oppose any legislation that seeks to end cash bail for criminals. We can't have this cashless bail things going on anymore. Yeah. So we have to, if you do the crime, you're gonna have to put some money up for collateral. We'll require murder sentences for drug dealers. I've talked about that legislation. And if we can't get there, we'll look for longer terms, of course, at least 25 years, hopefully, when they sell drugs like fentanyl. We're going after cleaning up Pennsylvania's most dangerous neighborhoods, whether that's in Philly or Pittsburgh, even in corners of Harrisburg, sadly. We were working with Latinos downtown Harrisburg, Rebbe and I. A little girl there, 10 years old, who said the pledge for us, still can't read and write in the schools. I know that's not a criminal problem, but just as an aside, we have a lot of problems. Yep. I'll establish a blue ribbon Pennsylvania Crime Commission tasked with developing a plan to lower crime rates and increase prosecutions of violent criminals across the state. We'll be partnering with federal law enforcement to target and neutralize violent gangs and criminals, especially these cartels that have expanded into Pennsylvania from Mexico and elsewhere. We'll deploy special task forces of the state police to assist local authorities. This has happened before in years gone by with great effect. Our state police are very professional law enforcement, and I think they'll help us in high crime areas where there's a spike in criminality. Any thoughts so far?
Nope, sounds good. We're done.
You know, I know there's great hesitancy in sending in the National Guard in neighborhoods. Obviously, that'll be an avenue of last resort, but we've seen it before in American history where we had to do it. I think in the 90s in Washington, D.C., when local law enforcement could do that. So that will always be in our pocket should these endeavors fail to create safe neighborhoods. You know, the parents of Philadelphia, they deserve better. They should not wonder if their babies are going to make it to school alive. Just talking about their safety, not their education. And how many heartbroken, empty homes now caught in the crossfire. Looking at 2,000 shooting victims in Philadelphia alone. I think it's 1,900 and something. I mean, it's just, the numbers are mind-numbing. Supporting victims of crime will allow crime victims to testify at bail hearings to ensure their own safety. And this was going to require, of course, legislation from the House and Senate. We'll ensure the confidentiality of all crime victims' home addresses and personal information. That's a must, because we're seeing a lot of retribution against victims and witnesses in the Southeast, especially with this rotation out of the jails by criminals, this early release, supported by Josh Shapiro. And of course, we'll expand the use of GPS tracking, what have you, for those accused of crime. Bottom line, that's my 4-pillar plan to support our law enforcement, keep criminals behind bars, and to clean up Pennsylvania's most dangerous neighborhoods and to support our victims. And with that,
Hello, everyone. I'm Carrie Lewis Del Rosso, the Lieutenant Governor nominee on the ticket, and I look forward to the Mastriano administration enforcing the law. As a mother of 3, I want my communities to be safe so our kids can walk as free people and make sure that they're safe. And that's what the Doug Mastriano as governor will do. And it's fortunate. Our small businesses need to want to open up their doors so they can continue to grow our economy. That's Main Street, Pennsylvania. It's extremely important. If they shut their doors like the Wawas in Philadelphia, it will continue. It needs to stop. Yeah. Doug Mastriano's the answer. He will stop the bleed in Pennsylvania and make sure that we secure our laws. Thank you very much.
questions? Yes, sir.
You talked a bit about election security. November 9th, the numbers are not your way. Will you accept it? What will...
I wonder what the premise of that question is. I mean, it's built upon that anyone who asks questions in 2020 is an election denier, which is a pile of nonsense. As a elected senator, constitutionally, I'm responsible for the oversight and the manner and conduct of elections. And so I will note that Stacey Abrams in 2018 still has not accepted the results of her elections 4 years ago. I will note, last I checked, Hillary Clinton in 2016 is still saying Russia collusion. When she paid for the Steele dossier, which should have been rejected out of hand, as an intel professional, we rate sources from A1 to F6. When I first saw this before all the facts came out, it looked like an F6 report to me, completely unreliable. And she still is using this nonsense of opposition research to hide behind and not concede. She still says the election was stolen. And so our goal is, of course, is free and fair elections. We don't play games. The election deniers on the other side. It's not us. And we need poll watchers to ensure election integrity.
Yep.
Glenn Youngkin last year in Old Virginia, the Dominion state, was told he was going to lose. But he had 90-some% of the polls manned, occupied, with observers. And because of that, there was transparency and accountability. And we're looking for the same in Pennsylvania for folks to go to dougforgov.com.
And also, just to answer your question, we're going to certify it because we're going to win.
Yes, Matt.
Colonel, how dire is the situation out there, really? I mean, you were talking about freedom versus tyranny. I mean, is it really that serious? And what is it that is making you want to run for governor?
I'm going to ask Reb to jump in first, and then I'll give you my thoughts on that here. How did we end up here?
Well, we basically have ended up here because the people have requested it. Doug and I originally were laughing at some of these folks you might see around us here when they originally asked a couple years ago. But you know what? What they saw was somebody who was going to speak for them. I mean, who doesn't want a voice speaking for people that are being oppressed? And so that's why we stepped into this race.
So in 2017, I was retiring from the Army after 30 years, and that's all I ever wanted to do in life, was to serve my country in uniform as a soldier. And Rebbe would ask me from time to time, what are you going to do after the Army? And I said, this is all I want to do, and it was true. Ever since I was 5 years old, sitting at the feet of my Uncle Joe Guba, this tough Union Hungarian man who served in Patton's Third Army, the only survivor of his Sherman tank during the Battle of the Bulge. His crew was killed. He survived because his hatch was open. He was driving in that thick Belgium Ardennes forest winter fog, and he was thrown out of the tank. And his story is amazing because he's told me as a little kid, I used to ask him questions. I love talking to Uncle Joe. Like, Uncle Joe, what happened? Well, you know what I mean? He talked like John Wayne. You know what I mean? I was blown out of my tank, and I woke up sitting Indian style in this puddle on the side of the road outside of Bastogne, just about to relieve the 101st and 10th Armored Division, trapped for about a week by the Nazis. And like, what did you do next, Uncle Joe? And he's like, well, Doug, you know what I mean? I put my intestines back in my stomach and went to the aid station, got patched up, and went back to combat. It's like, wow. That modeling for me and my dad's own service in the United States Navy put a burden in my heart to pay back my country. So I'm retiring, and I'm complaining to this young man. I'm in uniform. I'm about to do an interview on the radio about Russia. I was a subject matter expert on Russia and the Baltic nations, Eastern and Northern Europe. And off air, I'm like, you know, my service really didn't make a difference. The country's worse off. Things are collapsing, you know, in all these ways, and I'm feeling sorry for myself. And just really having a hard time, you know, mourning my retirement, and that I don't feel like my generation is handing the country off any better than how I got it from my dad's generation. And this young man looked over at this combat vet colonel, highly respected, you know, treated, you know, with a lot of respect because of my credentials. And he said, Colonel, why don't you do something about it? And so in 2018, we ran for office. Long story short, ended up a year later as a state senator. And we see how grave the needs are. In 2020, many of the people standing around us here lost loved ones, lost their businesses, had their kids, you know, bullied in schools because of these edicts and mask mandates. So things are really that bad. You know, I'm a soldier, I identify as a soldier. I'll never be a politician. That's why we're doing things so different. But I don't play games. I don't tolerate tomfoolery. And what I saw happen during the shutdown here, it was an outrage. And Rebbe was right when she said we don't like bullies. And we watched the Wolf administration and Josh Shapiro bully innocent civilians with the weight and power of the state behind them.
Right.
That's right. Nobody will ask Josh the hard questions.
That's right.
They'll look at his pages and they'll ask me about his allegations about me. So are you anti-this? Are you this and that? Are you kidding me? A retired Army colonel? Get serious. Do some investigation. And so, yes, things are that bad.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you think that the Democrats are actually taking a sledgehammer to the Constitution of the United States, trying to take away the freedoms of this country?
again, and I will say this as a mother of three, they silence us when we speak out.
Yeah.
That's our freedom of speech. They call us criminals when we decide to rally and we try to, practice our right, and it's a problem.
Yes.
It's our freedoms. That's why we're doing this, and that's again why Rebby and Doug stepped up.
Absolutely.
Walk as free people. It's very important. No more canceling our culture.
That's right.
No more canceling our culture. It stops with Doug Mastriano.
So, is I could, you'll be next.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes, they are. And that's why in many of my, speeches out there, and Rebby and I have been, very transparent. We live stream everything. The media is welcome to all our events. We've had hundreds of outlets join us at events. I mean, it's not as hard to catch up to us, as it is with Shapiro. I noticed about 20 people signing on the media list today, wherever that list is now. But that's why I often won't even say the Democrat Party anymore, because there's much of my family, as Italian Americans, we're Democrats, and it's not the same Democrat Party that, in a time, did stand up for the working class people. And we've watched this transition, this switch over the past 30, 40 years, where now the party of the people is the Republican Party. That you have retired Army Colonel Mastriano, like I said before, talking like a feminist on the floor of the Senate. We need to defend female athletes from male domination. What have we come to?
Yes.
And I stopped in my speech. You could watch it on the Senate page. I watched it and it was really fast. Then it seemed like a long time. I stopped and I'm like thinking, man, you sound like a radical feminist. And then I kind of turned to the left where the Democrats are on the floor of the Senate, and I appealed to them. And I think it was pretty clear in the tone of my voice. Like, where are the feminists? I was appealing for help, and only one of the Democrats voted with us. The rest voted against protecting women athletes. Sir.
This is quite a turnout today, obviously. Do you think your support in the middle of the state is going to be enough in getting people to the polls to overcome? Do you think the polls are wrong?
Wow.
The polls are wrong.
I'll answer that. Have Reb start off. I love that question.
It's a good question. What we're finding is this is not an unusual turnout for no matter where we've been, whether we've been outside of Philly or whether we've been outside of Pittsburgh, even in heavy Democrat areas, which is one of Carrie's areas. We had standing room only. What was it, about 400
people
that came out. So what we've seen is it truly is a people's movement from one corner of the state to the other, and even up in Erie, I believe we've been there several times, the same venue, and each time we go, it grows by about another 100. I think the last time was over 600.
You want to talk about what happened in your district?
So there, in the district that I'm in the Allegheny Valley, which covers Allegheny and Westmoreland County. It was a Democrat district. It was held by a 30-year incumbent, the Democrat leader, and they did move to a Republican area. When Doug did come out for a rally, even people that spoke on your behalf, they're Democrats.
Wow.
And it's very important that people know. And just to know, when I was, quote unquote, down 14 points in the polls, I won by 900 votes the day of. So that's something that proves something.
And I'll note that after we did that rally in Carrie's district with 400 or 500 people, it was standing room, it was packed in the Veterans Hall. It was amazing. We have pictures online. You could look at it so you can verify. Please fact check us. Please do. We're very transparent. Shapiro came a few days later.
Last week he was
Last
here.
week, and how many came out?
You can't tell from the pictures because they're muffled, but I would say there's only about 12. They didn't.
And that's friendly territory. Okay, to the polls. In the primary, many of the polls had me, for a long time, losing to the lead Republican opponent. Then when they finally, a few weeks out, they had me in ahead. They still were short by about 15 points or so. We had a blowout victory. 24% of the vote more. We had 45% of the total vote, but up ahead of my other rival. I watched Robert Cahaley from Trafalgar talk about his recent poll, and he was speaking with Megyn Kelly yesterday, and he said if there's anyone that's going to surprise people out there, it's Mastriano, because he said he's never seen at a state level this kind of movement, this kind of support. Because whether, as Rebby said, whether we're in Philadelphia with the Latinos campaigning, or that's right, or whether we're in Erie.
Latinos for Mastriano.
on, JC. Bring it on, brother. You know, we are seeing statewide Latinas breaking for Mastriano. We're seeing this national trend. You know, we saw Maya Flores, of course, down in Texas, where there hadn't been a Republican in 140 years, some ridiculous number. And she's born in Mexico, living the American dream, the bluest of blue areas of Texas, and something is happening. So the future of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania, of course, is with the Latinos, and we're seeing them breaking because, you know, they share the values, you know, as Congresswoman Flores has, you know, Dios, Patria, Familia, you know, God, nation, and family. And so we're seeing a lot of shared ideas. Many Democrats, you know, whether, you know, working class, Rust Belt, you know, muscle class Democrats or others, they share our values. They're veterans, they're patriots, they love their country, they're hardworking. You know, for us, I do believe the polls are wrong. We did see, so it's really hard because, you know, we'll see, of course, on November 8th.
Yes.
To answer your question directly. But we saw Rasmussen had me 3 points back, which is in the margin of error. Wick had another poll, similar numbers. And so I think we're going to shock people. So Robert Cahaley's like, how do you measure the enthusiasm Mastriano has? You know, how do you measure that vote? And he calls my supporters the shy voters. They don't want to answer polls. Yeah. And so I think he's hedging his bets because his numbers are going to be, he even told Megyn Kelly yesterday, his numbers are going to be wrong on us here. And so we do believe, based off what we've seen, whether it's in Tioga County or in Pittsburgh, or in Philly, and everywhere in between, we always get the events that we put together, the record crowds. Now, you'll see us at some events hosted by somebody or GOP. That's up to them to get the crowds out. But we host events, we're never disappointed. Right. There was during our bus tour in the middle of the state, upstate, I'm making that up, no, we don't have an upstate, but upstate Pennsylvania, near the New York border. I'm like thinking, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. This is working people. It's a rural county, you know, whether it's, you know, you pick a county up there, you know, Cameron County or Tioga, you know, or Warren. I'm like thinking secretly maybe 50 people, and we'll go in a room and Rebby and I will see 300 people waiting for us, and the pictures are online. And I, you know, now of course I have our social media guys panning the audience as well because we had it for a while, and I do believe we're gonna get out the vote. Even the Inquirer, which thinks that Fetterman won the debate. Even the Inquirer, which is no friend of mine and loves Shapiro, even they did an article some months ago by one of the writers that actually has disdain for me based off of what I read. And he's like, wow, if this kind of turnout happens, you know, in the middle T, as they call it, there's no stopping us. Yes. And that's going to happen.
I just have a couple issue-oriented questions, and one is on, you know, you talk about woke is broke, you know, and rattle off a list of things that you want to attack when you're governor. And I know that it's important for you when you say that people should live the lives that they want and walk as free people and so forth. So in keeping with that, I wanted to ask you, how do you approach one of the bills that gets promoted from time to time in the legislature is to extend the statewide anti-discrimination protections to cover sexual orientation and gender identity, to protect people from housing, job, service discrimination. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like they should be, do you feel like everyone should get those rights, and would you support that kind of bill, or does that conflict with your view of walking as free people?
Yeah, so my view of walking as free people obviously is engraved with blood, sweat, and tears. You know, for me, it's not theoretical or some bumper sticker from some politician like Shapiro, you know, who mocks my own service and, you know, therefore mocks the service of other veterans. You know, Rebby and I have, you know, bounced around the world here, 12 years out of the country, you know, multiple deployments to bad places. Things that I don't even wear ribbons for, you know, service in the Balkans, and watching what happened when people did not resolve their stuff at the ballot box. That's something we never want to happen here. So my vision is walking as free people is that you live your life as you see fit, and I don't, yeah. I've never read that specific legislation. Obviously, there's hundreds of bills that come out, and I think I've introduced 70 of my own bills or so. You can fact check that and give me the acronym. But in the end, you should not be discriminated about anything you do in life in Pennsylvania. You just live your life. I don't want. Yeah. I don't want Harrisburg in your bedroom any more than I want them in my bedroom here. I mean,
you know the status quo is right now that some cities and towns have passed
and extended that anti-discrimination protection on a municipal basis, but the state hasn't done it. So there's areas of the state where those protections
Sure.
don't extend. Are you saying you could support that?
I'm saying I support of everyone in Pennsylvania to live their lives as they see fit. And that's something it really, it doesn't need to be legislated.
And honestly, you have to realize when you're wanting to overprotect one certain group, you might be then hurting another group. So that's where the equality of having everybody allowed to make their own decisions, because what's happening right now in the schools are you've got people that, parents that are held accountable by God for the children they have, being influenced and being told not to tell their parents stuff they're being told in school. Well, that's setting them up for predatorial type behavior. So we need to look at, making sure we're not, overly supporting any one over another, but rather letting people make their own decisions and protecting the innocent the most.
I had not heard you talk about the sex trade before. Probably you have, but you would start a task force for sex trafficking. What brought the passion on for that issue?
My wife.
In serving in a job that I had, I came across somebody who, at 12 years old, was abducted from her country and brought here many years ago, actually, and was locked into a basement for 2 entire years and was so abused, she was told by a physician that she would likely not be able to have any more children. So knowing that could happen in Pennsylvania disgusts and sickens me. I mean, not to happen anywhere, but not in our state, right? Like that's just disgusting. And so obviously we have some passion. That particular individual asked for help, not just from myself, but also from Doug when she was able to purchase her own home, and she wanted to feel safe, and just asked for us to put a blessing on that. And I guess, people, we need to realize that we have to watch each other's backs. And dividing is not doing that. But rather we need to watch out for one another and realize where there might be hurts. Like, I didn't see that hurt when we first moved to Pennsylvania. I grew up here. I didn't know of anything so awful. But rather we should be more open and willing to see where we're hurting and try to help one another.
Reverend thought here on this, of course, is that the reality that sex trafficking is happening in our hometown area, in my Senate district in Pennsylvania, is reprehensible to me. It's disgusting to me. When you heard about sex trade, you thought it was, aberration or for the big cities, and now it's happening in, I would say, most cities across our state here. And when Revy told me the story of her beautiful friend, and being abused by some disgusting individual, and that this is allowed to go on, and nothing's been done to curb this in Pennsylvania by our senior law enforcement, Josh Shapiro. We're going to go to war on these sex traffickers in Pennsylvania. I mean that. So, on day one, we're creating that sex trafficking task force here, and we're going to put some of the greatest minds together from not just the state but the nation. There's a lot of groups working on this across the nation here, and I want to do our best to end it in Pennsylvania, to limit it so it's extremely rare, and those that are caught doing this are going to pay a high price, that's for sure. Last question.
Senator, how do you respond to complaints within the Jewish community regarding comments that you made about your rival's Jewish school and previous associations you had with Gab social network?
Yeah, so
Well, I would like to make a comment
Please.
on that real quick. I'm just going to say, as a family, we so much love Israel. In fact, I'm going to say we probably love Israel more than a lot of Jews do. I have to say that because, and the reason why I say that is because I've given, and Doug, we've given for I would say, at least 10 years to outreach to Israel and Jerusalem. I have visited Israel, we say for 5 years. We're just an average family. We're not wealthy people. We say for 5 years to make a trip because it was that important for us to educate our son on loving other cultures and understanding different backgrounds. And so we actually took him there in high school as homeschool families. We felt that was very important, and hence why we say for 5 years. Doug has actually been there more than once. We are extremely pro-Israel, pro-Jewish community. The issue that you're speaking of has to do with the hypocrisy of one individual, like we homeschool, okay? I understand not everyone can homeschool, but I would like to provide as much of an opportunity for Pennsylvanians to choose that, if it's possible, if Doug was in a position to do something. What we see is that somebody that is able to have the money to go to a expensive private school doesn't want others to have that same ability.
Yeah. So, and this is the last word here. We're going to wrap it up. So, the allegations from the left, white supremacist, anti-Semitic, homophobe. One of the Democrats put together a list, and the allegations of these 8 different folks. Some folks I didn't know exist. I'm like, are you serious? So I tend not to, it says in Proverbs from your holy book here, King Solomon said, "Answer not a fool in his folly." And so I tend not to answer, stupid questions. But since you are from Israel, I'm not calling you a fool. My opponent, though, is trying to hide behind something that doesn't exist. So Josh Shapiro calls me anti-Semitic for simply pointing out that he can afford school choice. That's right. Yeah. And that's not anti-Semitic. And so he's hiding behind a false allegation of a retired Army colonel vetted by the United States Army for 6 promotions. Only 3% of my class, made it to colonel. In my career field, it's a blessing from God. And there's no generals in my career field. It's strategic intelligence. At least last time when I was in the Army, there was still no generals. There was always talk. But with top secret access, and for top secret access, we have access as a military intelligence officer to some of the nation's most sensitive secrets, read onto some dark programs, with caveats, and they look for, extremism. They do, especially after what happened in the 90s. And there's not an inch of that in my system or blood. For Josh Shapiro to make that allegation is just another distraction. He's got nothing to run on except calling people names. And instead, I would actually, and I've never mentioned his school's religious affiliation. I never, ever mentioned it. And it's just funny that he brings that up, as an excuse to distract us from the issue. The issue is he is our senior law enforcement official, and he has a disaster on his hands, and his policies are destructive. He said in Philadelphia to an NBC affiliate in June that he was going to be a continuation of Wolf's policies. Pennsylvania, we can't afford 4 more years of Tom Wolf. And so, under Mastriano, we're going to have a new birth of freedom. One thing that'll interest you that my opponent should talk about, but he won't because he's so affiliated with the left. The BDS, we're done with any organizations that are pushing a boycott on Israel in Pennsylvania. It's not going to happen. So, thank you, everyone, for coming here in a rally. I know there's better things you could be doing on this fantastic autumn day, and we're appreciative of your support. 10 days to victory, and we're going to take back our state. Thank you.